Welcome to the Gnarly Girls podcast.
What's up, gnarly beings?
This is a loose-lipped, unfiltered, raw-dogging, stripping down of culture.
No fucks, no panties. This is a labia of love.
We're your hosts, Tony Naj
and Serafina Supernova. And this is Gnarly Girls.
Welcome to Gnarly Girls. Today's episode, it's a new world order after all.
It's a new world order after all.
All right, let's talk about the NWO, the New World Order, because I've been getting some comments about the NWO on my posts. So let's first define what the New World Order is. Do you want to go first or second?
I'll go second. I feel like you must start us off.
Okay, well, it's defined as a conspiracy theory. All right, let's just be clear about that. And basically the idea is that there is a cabal, a secret society, an intention to create a one world government that would basically eradicate the freedom of all quote unquote nation states. And this has been attributed as a right-wing conspiracy, which I want to contest, but the general consensus as of this here now moment is that this is a right-wing conspiracy or a fundamentalist Christian conspiracy to believe in the New World Order. So basically a one world government. I think it could be equated to the deep state, but there are some slight differences.
I mean, what's interesting about the Christian connection is like in the New World Order agreements, which I was reviewing last night, there's nothing really inherently Christian about it. Like it's actually pretty secular and strangely nature-based. Like some of the agreements of the New World Order, like on the like tombstone looking things in Georgia, that's what I was looking up. Like it's sort of nature celebrating. The strangest thing to me is the desire to keep the population under a certain amount, which is alarming. And also the fact that it's the first rule makes me think that the New World Order is very interested in control.
Well, population control is complex, right? Because what type of population serves the economic interests of society? You know, because, I mean, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but when we think about abortion, right? And this current administration's, and really this started in the previous administration, the attack on women's rights. I keep wondering, it's funny, I made a video about this, so I'm going to be releasing it, and it should come tangentially with this podcast. But this concept of voters versus consumers, because, and also warriors, you know, or people to fight within the military industrial complex or be part of the prison industrial complex. So population control is, I think, specifically wanting to look at how to breed populations that can serve these systems of the prison industrial complex and the military industrial complex, and also maintain a sort of consumer vibe, because I don't feel like either party is concerned with voting. I think they're more concerned with people as consumers versus people as voters or citizens.
Yeah, it's like, how can we make this machine function in alignment with our agenda? And I think the nature-based agreements that the New World Order is interested in has everything to do with putting their idea of what an ecosystem is supposed to look like on top of what an ecosystem actually functions as. And it's interesting because there is this emphasis in maintaining diversity. Like I was actually, like I've heard about the New World Order, whatever. When you asked me the other day, do you know what the NWO is? I thought you were talking about something to do with wrestling. So did my husband, Max. And like, I'm very like conspiratorially open. I actually think the demonizing of conspiracy theories, as we've talked about before on Gnarly Girls, is a part of an agenda of control to limit free thinking. So it was interesting to actually look at the agreements. So what I did last night was I watched a documentary on the New World Order, and then right after that, I watched a documentary on Bohemian Grove. And it was interesting to sort of see the intersection and the interplay of this sort of high society, very wealthy mindset, and how there's also this like objectification, not only of nature, but of diversity. And it's like, how do we puppeteer the entire world to suit our agenda? Because ultimately we are the puppet masters, which I know is a conspiratorial term, and we are controlling everything because all of these humans on planet Earth are our dolls, and we're just playing a psychotic game of Barbie. Like that is truly the metaphor that came in last night when I was like looking at the Bohemian Grove stuff, looking at the New World Order. I'm like, oh, these mofos are playing Barbie. Like the raunchiest, most controlling, grapey version of Barbie.
Or G.I. Joe.
Yeah, for real.
American hero.
Yeah.
All right. So I want to get back to Bohemian Grove. But I also want to say, let's just look at this from a meta-analysis of how humans want to play and connect with those that are within their network and within their family structure. And there is a sense of understanding that I think we all can apply to this concept of the New World Order that can extend beyond quote unquote conspiracy. So, you know, you and I are friends, and I'm going to have a show. And so I'm going to say, Sarah, you want to perform at my show? Because I want to be around you. So I'm going to give you an opportunity. I'm not like opening up an opportunity to the democratic public and let's vote in the best person to perform at my show. No, I'm going to ask you, Sarah, my friend, to come perform at my show. And let's say you had some money and you were like, oh, I've got all this money. And then I'm like, oh, I'm going to give my money to my kids because I want my kids to have money. So the way that we already deal within the average person, the way we deal with resources, the way we deal with nepotism, the way we deal with giving each other opportunities, this is what is happening on a global scale. And there's nothing conspiratorial about this. This is just like the businessmen are friends. They are playing golf together. Their wives are friends. Their kids are connected. Their kids are going to the same school. There is like a personal relationship between these people. And that personal relationship is just extending into this massive power structure. But it's obvious to me that even between, you know, Trump wants to be liked by Putin, you know, like there is a actual exchange there that's beyond just foreign policy. I mean, there is something going on with these politicians and these corporate leaders that is genuinely personal. And we as people are always looking out for those that we know that will benefit us or that we want to get closer to. You get what I'm saying?
Yes. It is a brotherhood.
Yeah.
It is a brotherhood that a lot of women are complicit in upholding.
But also it should be
and victims of.
We all do it. We all do.
At our own levels of access.
Yes, it's just the consequences for 99% of us are minuscule, you know? But again, I have a company. Someone's like, hey, a friend of mine is like, oh, can my daughter intern for you or work for you? And maybe their daughter has zero experience, but because it's my friend, I'll be like, yeah, sure, why not? We are always doing this. So I think in order to take out the charge of the idea of conspiracy around a group of people trying to rule the world, okay? Just look at your own world.
Right.
Look at your own community. Look at the way that we're already doing backhanded deals with each other constantly. It's just the stakes are very low, so it doesn't matter.
Right.
And I think when we can look at it like that, it's not going to be this, just like, it's going to be just actually rational human nature that is being played out constantly, commonly, and every single day.
I like this as a template, taking the charge out of conspiracy by looking at how these larger patterns are rationally playing out in our own microcosms. I think that's really helpful because I think there is so much mind control and programming around people even being scared to watch a documentary on something like this or look into it, because merely just looking into it means that you're somehow giving up your agency to some right-wing agenda. And we've talked about this before on the podcast, the co-opting of conspiracy theories and labeling it as alternative right, I think is an agenda to keep all people from rationally investigating some of these issues. And I have more to say, but I'll leave it there.
Well, again, I don't want to be beating dead horses because I am an environmentalist. But the NWO conversation, when I entered into it, was under a conservative president. It was under Baby Bush. I think people have got to wrap their heads around the fact that the internet was born during a conservative presidency during the time of 9/11. And every single person that was looking into 9/11, that was challenging the official narrative, that was looking at the put options, that was like, oh, wow, these stocks are being shorted. What's going on here? That was watching the film Loose Change, which was a documentary going on about the potential inside job of 9/11, et cetera, et cetera. We were all raging against the machine of a conservative government. So the psyop of rebranding conspiracy as if it's not anti-authority, period. And I think the thing that happened that was intentional is going from Baby Bush to Obama, where all of this, like this Occupy Wall Street mentality, this movement of liberal, leftist, anti-racist, feminist, anti-corporate people, then we're like, wait, no, Obama is being branded as change. And that rebranding of America through the lens of Obama took a lot of people who were part of a different movement of dissent and put them in the status quo. And they never kind of came back out of it. Like they were never really wanting to admit, I got lied to by Obama because he seemed very cool. He shot basketball. He understood that Kendrick Lamar was a better rapper than Drake. He was prophetic in his understanding around that. And Obama seemed to like genuinely embody something because there was an essence that he had that was like, and I don't think it's just purely about race, but he was a little less smarmy. And maybe he was like a little less grapey, hardened. Like, I don't know if Obama's a grapo. I mean, maybe we should look at those Epstein lists, but long story long about my Obama rant is that he, I think, was incredibly important in diffusing a movement of dissent that was left wing. And then when this next conservative government came into play, that's when conspiracy was really rebranded with QAnon and with 4chan.
So many things to say. I'm just tracking also how there was like a similar comfort under Biden and how people kind of lost the plot. Liberals lost the plot. If they didn't lose the plot, then we wouldn't have Dumbo taking dumps in his pants and all over the country in office.
Getting he shits his pants. We don't talk about that enough.
We gotta talk more about Trump shitting his pants.
Yeah.
How vulnerable. And also something I was really tracking in my research for this episode was the way the money has moved between administrations. And the first thing I want to say is when there was polling done, I think this was like maybe 10 years ago around what the public thinks the top 20%, 10%, and 1% have. What the public thinks the richest people in the world have is so much less than what they actually have. My brain was just being broken open by like graphs being put next to each other of what people assume is happening versus what's actually happening and where the wealth is. So that feels important in terms of New World Order, Bohemian Grove, all of these elite groups and politicians, and what's been happening since the Bush administration, especially. The movement of money, I believe, has been very intentional. And I think we've been set up for an economic collapse for a long time. And when you look at the spending under Obama's presidency, he was just draining money. And to think that
draining money and dropping drones.
Draining money and dropping drones. And I was also looking at MSNBC and some of their critiques of the Obama administration. And it's so interesting to watch how MSNBC went from this very sort of moderate place of being willing to critique both parties into this last election where we saw this overwhelming, unquestioning support of what was happening in the Democratic Party. And I think we see over time how these different news outlets are bought and then the people are lied to and blah, blah, blah. This is not revolutionary information. My point is watching the way that money has moved and seeing the actual numbers versus what we've been told as a people is very sobering. And I think it's another way to take the charge out of conspiracy is to track where the money has gone maybe 10 years before 9/11 and to current day.
Okay, I want to tell you a story that happened very recently that I think is tangential to the New World Order. And then I want to zip-zop back into Bohemian Grove and some controversial figures who are very polarizing. But I was at the co-op the other day. Of course I was. And I ran into a friend of mine and we were talking about politics. Of course we were. And for some reason, she mentioned how she had a bunch of years ago campaigned for Howard Dean. Do you know who Howard Dean is? Okay, so Howard Dean was a politician that was running against Baby Bush, and he was progressive. He had more Bernie Sanders-esque values. And he had this rally, I think it was in Ohio, and she was at this rally. And so she was telling me that it was a really rainy day. She had been down there campaigning. Like, it was like the weather sucked and all this, like, everyone was kind of like, feeling this thing. And Howard Dean gave this like amazing speech that was super motivational, that was super like powerful. And everyone in the audience was so pumped up and so inspired by this speech. And he wanted to keep the energy going. And so he like made this noise, and the noise was pyaw. Okay, just pyaw, just like that. Okay. And what happened after pyaw is the mainstream media took hold of this moment and they actually dropped the audio of the crowd cheering because, again, he was being cheered. He was like, he wanted to keep the enthusiasm, and they just had him at a podium going, pyaw. And he became truly a national joke. Like every single person that was doing late night, every comedian was like, pyaw, pyaw. And people just made fun of that noise. His campaign was obliterated. It was destroyed. It was intentionally brought to its knees. Okay, so I'm not saying that the New World Order like crawled into Howard Dean's mouth and made him say pyaw, but they took an opportunity to take this guy down, much like they've taken the opportunity to take Bernie Sanders down. Like someone with genuinely progressive politics, the Democrats take down. The Republicans don't even have to. Their own party will, because Howard Dean was too progressive and they just saw an opportunity. And then so when she told me that, I was like, that is upsetting. Because I remember laughing about pyaw, I was like, pyaw, but like retrospectively, I'm like, I was manipulated. I was I was told to laugh at a very progressive man because he made a funny noise, which is shameful. I am not proud of that. And then it also makes me think of there is another young politician, Joe Kennedy, who I actually went to high school with. I think it's Joe Kennedy. He's got red hair and he's a very progressive politician. Whatever. We can say whatever we want about the Kennedys. I'm not claiming like the Kennedys are like not part of something. But this dude was progressive in his way. At least he was presenting. Who knows? But he gave this very, again, just like populist, like looking out for the people speech. But he had like, when you have like white spit in the corners of your mouth? And he had that when he was talking. And he was made fun of, obviously. And I thought he had a very graceful reaction to it. He was like, they're going to pick apart whatever they can. But I haven't seen, he was almost like rising the ranks until he had spit in his mouth, which has happened to truly everyone. Like truly everyone has done a pia and truly everyone has had spit in their mouth. And so it's interesting, this kind of like bully, social shaming tactics of which to take down anyone that is genuinely progressive within the Democratic Party.
Okay. Many things to say. First of all, the way that I was gaslit and bullied in grad school for supporting Bernie more than Hillary was eye-opening. That was like another awakening for me. I was like, are you guys serious? Like, don't insult my feminism. Like, obviously, I'm voting for Bernie. Fuck you.
Yeah.
The other thing, I was in the 6th grade when George W. Bush Jr. was campaigning to be the president, literally the 6th grade. And my history teacher was this like very Southern woman who like rode a motorcycle and was real hardcore. And she was always talking about how Democrats and Al Gore were essentially like pussies. Like, obviously, she didn't say that in our history class, but like her presentation of everything was like, the Republicans are the real men and they're the one that are going to defend the borders. And I'm riding my motorcycle and I have boots up to my thighs and conservatism is sexy and Democrats are a bunch of dweebs. And then it's interesting how Democrats take that and then they like work that against themselves. Like, I live in a neighborhood full of professors connected to an Ivy League school that are all staunch Democrat white people. And they're some of the rudest, most annoying people I've ever met because they're just wealthy and in their bubble and have no idea what's actually going on. I've run into these people on the sidewalk many times. I'm just a renter. Don't shoot the messenger. I didn't choose to live here. This is just the cheapest rent. I live in an old real estate office. But it is interesting to witness that. Like, the Democrats really work against themselves.
So the reason why this is important is when we're thinking about the New World Order, right? And we're thinking about the relationships between these politicians beyond party lines, right? Like behind back doors, what are the actual and genuine relationships between these people?
And was Trump a Democrat? Was Trump aligning and benefiting from Democrat values before he rebranded?
He was a Democrat.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So
I think that like what we're referencing is genuine progressive values is as threatening to the Democrats as it is to the Republicans.
Yes.
And when you look at that, then you were like, why are both parties threatened by a certain ideology that is it's challenging corporate interests. And again, okay, we are all hip, I think, more than ever before to these corporate interests. So when we go back to this concept of the New World Order and a one world government, okay, the original, not the OG, but some of the OG speakers on this subject are some controversial figures. We've got Alex Jones, we've got David Icke. All right. So These are controversial figures for a variety of reasons. But Alex Jones in the early 2000s, the late 90s, he was doing a kind of like gonzo journalism. I think he probably saw himself as, um, you know, like a Hunter S. Thompson type, and he was taking his camera and he was trying to break into Bohemian Grove. So Bohemian Grove is an event that happens annually with the elites, and it's secretive. No one knows what happens. So it's a party, it's a gathering, it's a ceremony, it's where they do their secret sex orgies. We don't know. But Alex Jones filmed himself trying to infiltrate Bohemian Grove. And I got a VHS tape of this in the I mean, it was a VHS tape, genuinely. He also was looking at things like Waco and the narrative around Waco. He was talking about the Bilderberg groups. I mean, I think he was talking about the Council of Foreign Relations as well. So the Bilderberg Council of Foreign Relations is an official group of people. It's less like clandestine. It's like it has a website, like you can kind of buy your way in. But he was the one, and I think Alex Jones is a part of why there is this right-wing connection between conspiracy and New World Order. He is a player in that. And some people even think that he's part of, Alex Jones is controversial, especially because it's Sandy Hook stuff, and people think that he is also a plant, or he's not. But those VHS tapes were him attempting to talk about this concept of secret societies. And of course, there's also the Skull and Bones, which is brotherhood within Yale University. And I think Harvard has its own version of the Skull and Bones.
And the Bushes are a part of Skull and Bones and have been for like 5 generations.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's interesting about Alex Jones, shout out InfoWars, LOL, and where I think he really lost the plot is so many places. Yes, Sandy Hook, and also the just loyalty to a patriarchal Christian daddy God. I'm like, y'all, you men, you need to divest, not just men, y'all need to divest from patriarchy and white supremacy and real ass control and understand how religion is a tool of that in order to understand how you are not actually leading the horses to water. You're like maybe dropping a couple of packs of oats and then it's just all blowing away in the wind because you lose the plot. I think it's interesting that Alex Jones was so vocal about GMOs and our bodies and like poisoning, like the government trying to poison us through food. Like there were some things that he was correct about,
No. They're not some things. Many things.
Yeah.
Alex Jones was correct about many things. That does not mean he's not controversial, and it does not mean that I am vibing with everything he said.
No, I'm not vibing with Alex Jones. I think he would be spitting on you while talking. I'm like, I'm gonna need you to relax.
But he was correct about many, many things. And I think and like also, okay, so the concept of the ruling lizard elite, which we've also referenced.
More of a David Icke territory, but also Alex Jones.
Yes, but David Icke definitely talks about that. And I think one of the things that is problematic about that is there is this anti-Semitism that's connected to the quote unquote lizard people. And also, again, it is a dehumanizing. And the thing that's I think problematic about dehumanizing is because then you don't have to see yourself.
Yes.
And that is the thing that I think is most important, is that we see ourselves. So there's another concept around the bloodlines, and that every president is related. Even Obama's also related. They all are like 4 bloodlines apart or something. They're all related to the same king, and they all have this person's bloodlines. So when we think about kings, right, and we think about politics and we think about policy for most of human history and monarchies, it is not it is not surprising to me at all that there would be a bloodline relation. Like that doesn't, again, we have to take the charge out of it because we're like, oh, bloodlines, they're eating blood. It's like, no, they're related because, again, people who are related are giving their family members opportunities. People who are related are going to, experience nepotism. That is, look at Hollywood, look at all these Nepo babies. I mean, we're seeing it constantly. So you're going to have more opportunities to be involved in the political system if you have family members who have been involved in the political system. That is just something we see over and over and over again. And that is not a conspiracy. That is literally how, and I mean literally, that is how global politics have worked through monarchies through that for thousands of years. We've been looking at and like dealing with bloodlines, and there's been the breeding of bloodlines in order to maintain power within certain families. So when people like are making these documentaries and they're like, these bloodlines are where everyone's power is consolidated. Yeah, of course. Of course. Yes. That's history.
And it's not random. That is like a huge gripe I have with liberal-minded folks being like, well, it's not that organized. It's all just random and there's a lot of destruction and power grabs. I'm like, wow, what an excuse to actually not do research. Because it really doesn't take that much to track the patterns. But I think there is this like egoic thing that gets in the way, and it's identity politics also, as we've talked about, that keeps people from actually researching. And also people's life force is being siphoned. They're fucking exhausted, so they are turning on the Netflix and ripping the bong. They're not doing, I'm like, rip the bong and turn on a YouTube documentary of some random dude who just decided to make, hopefully a woman, hopefully more conspiratorial documentaries by women and femmes and queer folks in the future. But there's a lot on YouTube from, maybe some would call them incels. I think that there is maybe some more endearing language we could use for these investigative journalists. LOL. I should not call them that, but I have respect. I have respect for anyone willing to question the system and also put themselves on the line for that. Something I keep coming back to is the right wing and like alt-right folks would have to let go of so much in order for there to be less stigma around some of the ideas that they adopt. But I think this like Jesus is king thing like really gets in the way, because something that Christians do that right wing alt folks also do, they call Trump a patriot. They say there are the white hats. There's this like group of people that Trump's included in, these patriots that are actually, working against the New World Order and the Illuminati to bring back agency and patriotism to our country. And there is this othering that we keep talking about that doesn't have a lot of these folks looking at how they're actually complicit in systems of oppression. Like some of the most patriarchal, misogynist, white supremacist fucks are the same ones calling for the investigation of the New World Order, the Illuminati, and all of this control, not seeing how they're also loyal to paradigms and thought of control.
Yeah, I think one of the most brilliant Saturday Night Live sketches, I don't know who wrote it. I assume it was Michael Che, but I could be wrong. But it was...
I love Michael Che.
Yeah. It was Black Jeopardy, and it was like... So they were having like a Black Jeopardy episode, and Tom Hanks talk about...
Both of our faces.
I mean, Tom Hanks talk about Illuminati, like the first person to get COVID, and
we both had a somatic reaction to that.
Yeah, no, I'm like, I don't trust no Tom Hanks, which is upsetting because big, sick movie. But
also, he was a dick in You've Got Mail.
Yeah, he was. Okay, so Tom Hanks is definitely part of the New World Order. But this was a brilliant sketch where you had him playing like a kind of older Trumpy guy, and there was this camaraderie between him and the Black contestants of Black Jeopardy, because they were like, can't trust no government, like that's what Tom Hanks was saying. And then all the Black people were like, yeah. You can't trust the government. So I think the thing that is most upsetting about conspiracy being co-opted by racists, that there's a lot of non-whites who are very distrusting of the status quo and of the government. And that's such an interesting alliance to take place. And then again, I just keep going back to the concept of white privilege and how, whiteness was constructed in the 1600s as a means of keeping Black and white people apart, So there's like a certain heartbreak I have for the racist, misogynist conspiracy people, because I'm like, yo, there's some hot chicks over here. There are some great non-whites. And if we could just get if you could just be less racist and less sexist and misogynist, like, we're a vibe. But the commitment to the racism and misogyny and the privilege of masculine and whiteness, that they won't let go of, that is part of why us conspiracy-minded people are still quite segregated.
Yeah, you can't have just a little bit of the information and then double down on your belief systems that are rooted in systems of oppression. Like, it's just not going to work. And I think that the master puppeteers of the world know this. And as we've talked about before, there is a pitting against each other. And they know that they can use these incel alt-right fucks to continue to make conspiracy theories a joke so that liberal, anarchist-minded people will continue to reject that. But I think something that you and I have talked about is, like, if you're a white person who's like anti-conspiracy theory, or I was reminded the other day of conspirituality. Do you remember that term that came forward during COVID? This was like,
yeah. So COVID also, talk about a financial grab. If you want to look at the statistics around the richest people on the planet currently and how much they made during COVID, and then you want to compare that to the financial losses of the average person, I challenge you to not see COVID as an economic game, much like the subprime mortgages and the involvement of BlackRock in subprime mortgages and creating the housing market to be completely obliterated for BlackRock, the company, then to buy up these houses in order to rent them back to people and to completely exploit any potential homeowner. So whatever you want to say about COVID and vaccines and all of that, let it go. Look at the social experiment of the economics. Look at that. And I think that when you implore yourself to look at those graphs, and you can, again, people can say, oh, they're just being opportunist. Okay. So let's talk about opportunists versus like planned clandestine behavior. All right. The United States has a relationship, an economic relationship to China. The United States has an economic relationship to Russia and Saudi Arabia and Israel and all of these countries that we are intimately involved in either through war efforts or now current tariff efforts, okay? You don't think the United States is intimately connected to the cartel network of Mexico? Of course. Of course they are. So all of these tariffs that are being put on, all of these war efforts, all of these things, let's look at the economics behind it. With China, China is our greatest lender. All of our debt is owned through China. And then we're going to put tariffs on China? Like, this is a conversation behind closed doors, okay? Because we owe China trillions of dollars. They own our economy. So the tariffs that we're going to put on China are not accidental. We're not showing China who's boss. Oh, yeah, let's just show China how tough we are. You think we're showing the cartels how tough we are? You think that? No. No. The cartels are more tough. These are conversations that are had. So, again, we want to talk about insider trading. the insider trading that happened during BlackRock and the subprime mortgages, okay? That was so much money was made at that stock market crash. During 9/11, you have these companies that are completely going to be decimated only to go back up again. So all you have to do is sell when high, buy when low. This is how the stock market works. This is how our foreign policy is impacting the stock market. And when you know what the foreign policy is going to be, you're going to be able to do the investments that are going to benefit you because you understand what stocks are going to be impacted by the foreign policy that you are deciding. So talk about a new world order. The economic interests between the United States and these mega superpowers around the world that we are intimately involved with, either through war or through colonialism, these are backdoor agreements that everyone is a part of. I don't think anyone is surprised ever. You get what I'm saying?
One hundo. And the banks just be printing money. They just be printing money. And question, I am blanking. I'm about to Google it if you don't know. I'm sure you know. The name of the organization owned by the cartels that owns all of the banks. What is that called?
Oh, you're going to have to look that up.
Okay, I'm going to look that up
because owns all the banks in Mexico?
No, like all of the banks. Period.
No, you must look that up.
Okay, I'm gonna look this up. Yeah. On when you go into your next thing, I'll mute myself and do a little Google because my keyboard.
When you go into your next thing, which I'm anticipating you do.
So you will give us another monologue that we need. I fully support it. We are so grateful and lucky and blessed. Yeah, I need to look this up because I was also looking into the banks printing money last night, and I think it's interesting. I know we talked about Elon Musk and him pushing for this like one currency, and the New World Order is very interested in like a one currency. And then the amount of time that other countries.
Yeah, the one currency. All right, let's talk about
also, and the amount of times other countries have quite literally been threatened for trying to transition to the euro or another dollar over and over again. I think we must talk about the petrodollar, which I know is also conspiratorially charged. I'm going to hand the mic to you. I'm going to do a little Google, see if I can find the name of this shit.
Okay, the funny thing is I was going to go on a rant about the petrodollar. So L-O mother F and L. So the petrodollar, in case you are not aware, is all oil is traded with the petrodollar, which is backed by American currency. So United States benefits from all global oil trade. And that is a huge reason why the United States is one of the largest proponents of maintaining an oil-based economy. And every single country that has tried to challenge the petrodollar, including Iraq, we go to war with. Gaddafi, we go to war with. So if you were to investigate the history of anyone who wanted to dissent and who wanted to perhaps trade oil in the euro, which would technically, from a global perspective, because the European nations are more like there's more of them who are all using the same currency. But no, the United States is insisting that everything is traded with the US dollar. So if we're going to talk about a global currency, that, which the euro is a model of, right? And this was, I think, a big thing around Brexit and not wanting to be a part of the global currency of the euro, and how that kind of played out again through racism, right? It's like all of the ways in which governments manipulate the populace through racism in order to maintain their agenda. So with Brexit, I mean, this is a good question. Why deviate from the euro? Because I think they don't want England does not want the euro to be more powerful, because England is more aligned with the United States than with the rest of Europe. Okay, so I just answered. Because England and Europe, England and the United States are symbiotic. They're just like, when you separate an electron, they're quantumly entangled in a deeper way. So that was why Brexit was important. And I guess the United States really is invested in keeping the Middle East at each other's throats, right? So that's why there's so much where interference in Middle East politics. If you're wondering, why is the United States always sending money to the Middle East when we have homeless people here? It's because to interfere in Middle East politics ensures them that there will not be a united Middle East that would then create their collective economy. So the borders in the Middle East and keeping them dangerous is very important to the U.S. policy, U.S. foreign policy. And that's why we're always funding this opposite sides who are fighting. That if we are giving money to both parties that are at war in order to keep the war going, and every one of the puppet regimes that we put into in the Middle East is ensuring destabilizing. So, how'd your Google search go?
The Federal Reserve. I can't believe I pulled that out of my
mouth. We have to do a whole Federal Reserve.
Yeah, no, we do. Because there's also
the cartels are involved in the Federal Reserve.
Well, this is conspiratorial. It's also conspiratorial that the Federal Reserve does not accept any auditing. It was also, it was sad that it was created on some secret island. I think it's Jekyll Island in like the early 1900s by what? A group of private elite rich people created the Federal Reserve. And then when you look up on Google who the Federal Reserve reports to, it says Congress and the public. L-O motherfucking L. So I'm just like, the Federal Reserve does need its whole own episode. I honestly feel like we might want to like interview my dad for that episode because he is an expert on this. The amount of times my dad has said the word petrodollar and the Fed into the phone to me over the last 15 years is so funny.
I need to understand the cartels in the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, so we gotta go in on it.
No, what did you discover? Or you were
that was something I was watching last night. I need to do more research on it. I wouldn't want to like speak out of my ass. But I do think that there is privatization of the Federal Reserve totes itself as this like public for the people connected to Congress. There's nothing that makes me more upset than the government and branches of government pretending like they're actually serving the people. And also like the doubling down on what is the thing that created why am I blanking on this term? The U.S. Constitution, the doubling down on the U.S. Constitution, like that is going to save us, you know, or like holding the banks or holding the Fed or holding politicians accountable to as if like that doctrine created by slave owners and white men is going to be the thing. This morning, I was talking to Max in bed because he was like, did you see that Trump put all these, like the first thing I heard this morning when I turned over was Trump put all these tariffs on the thing and we're entering the next Great Depression. And I was like, you know what? I really think Council of Indigenous Grandmothers should be the next president because like that's just what that is my only solution is a complete abolition and dissolving of the United States as it stands and like a complete rebuilding and new agreements because all of these things are outdated. None of it makes sense. And you cannot be a nationalist. You cannot be a patriot. You cannot be loyal to the U.S. Constitution without being a white supremacist and a misogynist and patriarchal.
Wait, we have to, when you couldn't remember the Constitution, okay, I was talking to my kid and her friend.
I'm like, I don't respect this, so it doesn't even live in my brain.
No, wait, I was talking to my kid and her friend, and we were talking about politics. Every single conversation, I'm talking about politics. But her friend, my kid's friend, was like, yeah, who are those people again? You know, the one with the wigs?
The founding fathers.
And I go, she goes, who are those men again? The ones with the makeup and the wigs? And I'm like, drag queens? And my kid's like, the founding fathers? Yeah. The girl's like, yeah, the founding fathers. I was like, right, they were drag queens.
And Thomas Jefferson and some of these other fucks were like, you know, we need the money to be for the people and make sure that the banks don't take control because the moment that the banks take control, but like for white men just to be concerned about their money and where the money was going and to then create a constitution based on control and slavery, and call it freedom and then act like you're concerned with the banks having control. I mean, of course the banks are then going to control us. because the Constitution wasn't actually built on liberation and freedom. This country was built on genocide and rape. So none of it adds up, and it all needs to go away. And something I was struck with when researching for this episode was the way that we would probably be called terrorists for everything that we're saying, especially according to the New World Order. Because one of their like huge things is anyone that is challenging the systems as they stand is a terrorist. Anyone who's speaking out against the United States of America is a terrorist. And I think that's where we fall into this really interesting category as gnarly people and anarchists, because we're not nationalists and we're also not rich white Democrats. So where do you fall when you don't respect this country or what it was built on, but you're still benefiting from the privilege of living here, but you want to see it completely dismantled, and you have ideas about how there could be new formations of democracy, but it's called unrealistic. And some people even say it's eugenic to say that Indigenous people should have more political power, which I don't fucking agree with or understand. But
I mean, I also think, all right, we have to rehumanize the concept of the New World Order and our own relationship to privilege and sacrifice, right? Because, again, like, as I was saying before, these economic relationships that the United States has with China, with Russia, with the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, et cetera, Venezuela, like all these countries, these are relationships that were built over time between powerful people in order to take care of them and their friends and their families, which is, again, very relatable. It's relatable content. And I think the thing that is interesting about now in this moment is, like, to what extent are people that speaking out making actual sacrifices that genuinely threaten their privilege, And I think that's the other thing to look at. Like, when I think of, people who've risked their lives, people who've like risked their safety or the safety of their families, et cetera, in order to try to challenge something. It's interesting how we're not being asked to do that, and we're not doing that. We're just kind of like talking shit. You know what I mean? And I think there's something to be said about how we're given the opportunity to talk our shit, which makes us feel as if we're doing something. And that can feel like enough. Like, okay, I've talked my shit. I've thought this through. I'm going on, moving on, And I think that there's something that we all have to look at within the self. Like, to what level are we open to, like, genuinely not only sacrifice, but risking for our values and our beliefs? And, like, we're not being challenged enough to even see what we're capable of or what we're made of or how complicit we are. I mean, we are complicit. We know we're complicit.
You find a lot about yourself. You find out a lot about yourself when you actually live in community versus like making Instagram reels about it. And
present company included.
Yeah.
Myself,
yeah. And from my experience of actually having to do that, because I truly lost my house and I had to live in my friend's yurt in the forest because I could not pay rent. My husband had been furloughed from his job and I was doing chores in exchange for living in this yurt. I learned so much about myself and my own patterns, my own relational patterns. And for so many years, I had romanticized this idea of living in community and living on land with people. And the dream of that and the fantasy of that versus doing it, it is a boot camp in higher self-embodiment and self-realization. It is a boot camp in boundaries. It is a boot camp in selfishness and understanding, like, where can you actually give up more? Where can you actually offer more? Where do you have more within you to give? And I've been thinking about this. And then how do you function in an ecosystem when that ecosystem is actually not based on who has more money than the other person, or like who has a status in society based on XYZ? And I've been thinking a lot about this since our last episode on borders and private property, because I've had a lot of people reach out to me on Instagram also since posting a video about not believing in borders. And if you believe in borders, you think you're boring. And this one white woman in particular commented, being like, well, obviously you don't own land because this only could come from someone who doesn't own land. I'm very proud to own my land. And I was like, wow, like you should really listen to our episode on Snow White supremacy. And also, I think a lot of people who maybe own land think that way. And something I didn't say on the last episode, maybe I did, but it's become like really clear to me in terms of like, what do I believe about land and borders and boundaries and private property? Like, what is my thesis statement? My thesis statement is that we belong to the land and we belong to each other. And people don't belong to us and the land doesn't belong to us. So what happens when we start to move from that place, not only in our thoughts and our words and our actions, but also in our buying power? Like, what are we doing? Is it one economic blackout on a Friday so you can wear a fucking sticker and pat yourself on the back and act like you're doing something? Or is it a way of living and being that you decide to revolutionize within you?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to do an episode about intentional community, but because I do want to maintain our focus on the New World Order. But I think where we can kind of tie it together is that there is a lifestyle that we've all gotten to be accustomed to. And reimagining how to shift that lifestyle to fit into a new way of self-organizing is difficult because we are accustomed to being in our little boxes and watching our TV and being with our, these people that are, even if you're in a family of two or one, you could be in a couple, and we already know how complex it is to live with one person, So I think that part of the New World Order, right, is this isolation that has taken place as our cultural norm. And now living in genuine community, which was how we were evolving for, 200,000 years, is incredibly foreign and uncomfortable and difficult. Mm-hmm. And so when we think about you were going on before about the founding fathers and their agenda and their conversations when founding America with the Constitution, there was a genuine idealism that was contagious, right? And that is why there is the propaganda of the American dream that roots back to the Constitution and roots back to the founding fathers, and why there is patriotism and why there is this but in America, we have these freedoms that other countries don't have. You and I are speaking our minds, and as of right now, we're not being rounded up by the Gestapo, so if America was just one thing, if it was just an obvious dictatorship, it wouldn't be successful. The branding would never have worked. I think that the experiment of America was to exploit a facade, not even a facade, was to exploit a genuine desire that these men had. But the problem is the men had these desire for men and for their friends. So there was a club, and they wanted this freedoms for them, but they weren't considering the indigenous people, and they weren't considering women, and they weren't considering the slaves that they were bringing over, but they still had this idealistic vision for them. And I think, again, this is a microcosm of the even more microcosm of the New World Order, right? Because you have people looking out for their kind, quote unquote, or their friendships or their alliances. But I think the experiment with America that was so successful was exploiting a genuine an authentic look at freedom, quote unquote freedom, because it could be exported. And that's why Hollywood is in America. Like global media is American. Like I'm sure we get some British shows and we're like, oh, we like The Office. It's funny and blah, 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 or like there's people who've like watched some Bollywood films. But the way that the United States empire has exported Hollywood. I mean, you could go to any country in the world and you're watching porn made in the United States even. Like we've exported pornography, we've exported our movies, we've exported our TV show. And so TV shows. So that's also created this like massive cultural global infiltration of American like not only ideology, but quote unquote culture, whatever American culture is, but taste too. You get what I'm saying?
It's very dominating.
Yeah.
Be like us. Be more like us. We are the ones. Could you give us a little dissertation on the Rockefellers and how they connect to all of this?
Okay, well, I mean, the Rockefellers are part of like a few families, right? And you have John D. Rockefeller, who is this patriarch, this grandpa, who had his tentacles in not only the like transportation, but also plastics and oil and medicine, because all of these the petroleum from the plastics and the oil could then be put into medicine. And so I think what John D. Rockefeller understood as a business person was vertical integration, which is basically a business concept where you have a product that can be used in multiple different industries, right? So you vertically integrate your brand in order to maximize profit. And so by being involved in oil and plastics and medicine, he was finding all these different applications for products that he was making. And then I think with like a lot of these, okay, so again, you could say this is just the nature of investment. So have we talked about like Bayer and Monsanto and that relationship? We have or we haven't? I can't remember what we talked about. We have?
About Monsanto and Alex Jones, but not Bayer.
Okay, well, so Monsanto is a company that sprays chemicals on food. And a lot of the chemicals have been linked to a certain type of cancer or disease or whatever, okay? And Bayer makes the medicine to like fix this disease. Okay, so Monsanto creates the disease and Bayer fixes the disease. And Monsanto is invested in Bayer and Bayer is invested in Monsanto. So there is this like triangle between like create the problem, fix the problem, invest in each other. So there is no, as like an investment opportunity, Bayer and Monsanto want the other to exist, need the other to exist. So you could argue, oh, that's just the nature of Wall Street. This is what you could argue about all of these things. This is just the nature of the system, so Bayer is a good investment. Monsanto is a good investment. They just happen to be invested into each other because they're just, whoever's managing their portfolios is like, oh, this is a good investment. I'm not even seeing the connection between the two. Right. So I think that's a perfect example of looking at like the relationship between these countries, right? Like between the United States and China and between the United States and Russia. Like it would look on paper that Bayer would be like, Monsanto, stop making your chemicals and causing this disease that we're treating. But that Bayer is not saying that to Monsanto at all. And it's the same thing that's going on with these war efforts or these tariffs or whatever. They could be saying, hey, you stop that. Don't do that anymore. But instead, there is this like back deal conversation that's like, oh, how are we both going to profit from this conflict? This tension we're creating, we both know is happening. We profit from each other existing. We profit from the intention.
Sounds like a template that can be reproduced over and over again.
Yeah, totally. So
I mean,
that's a good metaphor, I think.
I was Googling while you were talking the Rockefellers' connection to the Federal Reserve. I do think we need to have a whole episode because now
Yeah, it's a whole.
I can get my dad's higher self just like beaming in because the amount of times he's tried to explain this to me and I've just been like, I don't have the brain heart capacity to really take this in, but I think now is my time, Simba. Because even just looking at the ownership structure of the Federal Reserve is upsetting. The fact that there's Federal Reserve banks, member banks, and then a board of governors, which I'm sure the Rockefellers are a part of. And yes, this just needs to be a whole episode.
Yeah, and I think the thing with the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, like all of these families, right? And these secret societies. So let's go back to the New World Order. The let's even okay, I mean, like, we go to the New World Order and we go to all of the potential like activities that happen within, like why within these secret societies is there also this like underlying conversation of like sex trafficking or abuse or illegal activities, right? And if you were to just look at a regular fraternity, not just the Skull and Bones, right? Like the Skull and Bones is an exaggerated fraternity, but if you were to look at a regular fraternity, what builds intimacy is trauma and engaging in collective crime, right? So that is why the hazing is so important. And like you experience the hazing. I mean, we're going to talk about hazing. We're going to talk about public humiliation. You see it in Hollywood. We saw it with Chris Rock getting slapped, right? Like that was a public humiliation for some reason that like we are not clear about as the public, but we are witnessing it. And then we are left to question, like, why did that happen? And it was the same thing that I was noticing with Zelensky. Like, here's a guy who could for sure wrestle Trump or JD Vance to the floor and serve them their ass. Like, this is a guy who's physically way more dominant than either of the politicians he was in conversation with, but they were publicly humiliating him and dominating him, and he was being forced to just take it on the chin and get a little butt fucked with no lube, because this public humiliation is connected to the financial agreement between the United States and Ukraine. So there is this charade, there is this play, there is this like, oh, let's humiliate Zelensky and show everyone what men we are, even though we're all wearing makeup. And Zelensky's just like sitting there being sexually dominated because that's part of the ploy, and then you have RFK who, he went on and on and on about waxy waxies, and now he's like, oh, everyone should get the BDSM, what is it, the mRNA vaccine, So, okay, like that's contradicting to your previous platform, but this also feels like a public humiliation because we all know that JFK Jr. is also accused of some sexual assault. Like, who knows what happened with that? So what kind of ownership is happening, or what kind of backdoor deals is he a part of where he's now like, okay, well, I'll just promote this.
Yeah, like if you're going to sexually assault your nanny, you're probably going to also betray yourself in other ways and all of the people who supported you. Just a little personal anecdote on like the microcosm of the macrocosm of frat boy culture. You would think that my boyfriend would have roofied me to rape me when I had sex for the first time and had a penis in my vagina. But actually, it was his best friend. His best friend roofied me so that he could rape.
His friend could rape
During beer pong. Just like during beer pong at some random frat house in North Carolina. I was in high school. He was in college. They put roofies in the boxed wine. I was fucking roofied while playing beer pong. And then I was raped. And it was that just commonplace, just a random Friday. Had to wake up the next day to go to my brother's soccer game, had to go to rehearsal for Peter Pan at Children's Theater of Charlotte, where I was probably playing some problematic part of an Indigenous person, like Tiger Lily's friend, just a real clusterfuck of issues happening. But like that's how it goes. That's how it goes. Like that is the brotherhood. That is just like, a very basic low to middle class example of how it goes in frat boy land.
Right. And frat culture is a example of the New World Order, right? So you want to look at the psychology of the New World Order, just go to a fraternity and you will see it. And I think that's where we have to take like the con out of conspiracy, is that, we want to think of it as like a con. The con is them. It's not the thinking. It's not the psychology. It's not the philosophical inquiry. Because in truth, conspiracy is about questioning an official narrative. It's about questioning the story that we were told. Like that, I mean, again, like we could, if you don't know that conspiracy theory was coined by the CIA, like I don't know what to tell you. It had to do with people who had ulterior understandings of what happened to JFK. So people questioning the official narrative around JFK is when conspiracy theory as a concept came into the public lexicon.
And anyone who's telling you to not question what's happening and that it's problematic to even ask questions, don't trust that person. And just because I said the word conspirituality before, so this
I forgot about that. Sorry.
White boys during COVID, two white yoga bros. I couldn't have less respect for any archetype. Two white yoga bros did a podcast about conspirituality, and they were conflating people who were questioning the COVID narrative with people who also believe in, like, the lizard people and the New World Order and all of these other things. And the way that if you're susceptible to conspiracy theories, then you're going to create a whole spiritual identity around it, and how problematic and dangerous it is to question the official narrative. And they really know best because they have their yoga teacher certifications. I could literally vomit in my hands and like smear it all over the camera right now. Don't ask me to, because I did have the puke bug yesterday. And this thing blew up because it was two white men talking about it. Like, Gnarly Girls will blow up. I am holding out for a Gnarly Girls late night show because I think that would be truly healing to the entire planet. But the way that it's going to take us so much longer to get this podcast out into the world versus two white dudes just being like, yeah, conspiracy theories are problematic, is indicative of the issue. And the amount of like white people who identify as liberals who I saw sharing that at the time was also upsetting. And so I think there's like a real negligence and we always land on the need to self-realize in Gnarly Girls, but it is because this is a spiritual issue. This is an ego issue. This is an identity issue. This is a groupthink issue. This is a control issue. And anyone who was also sharing that podcast and being like, you should really listen to this. My experience of them in relationship is that they were controlling as fuck. So that's my data points.
Yeah, and I think so it's this concept of dangerous. Like, it is very dangerous to be conspiratorial minded. It's interesting. And I think that, like, according to, a Wikipedia entry on the New World Order, is that thinking this way is going to turn you into a terrorist. Like you mentioned, that we would be considered terrorists and that this type of thinking will turn you into a terrorist. So there is no greater insult, than to be a terrorist, or a more dangerous insult. So get a relationship to this language, so like everything, there is a vocabulary. If you go into business, you have the vocabulary of business that you have to learn. You have to learn the concept of externalities, and um, you have to learn all these what is an ROI and what is a BID and blah, 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 right? And so that language keeps you within the community of business, and that's how you exclude others. So there is a language of conspiracy that I think is intentionally is like exclusionary in itself. And then if you say certain words, if you were to say the Federal Reserve and people would bristle or something and be like, oh, well, you must be one of those, and then make all this assumptions around your belief system. If you're talking about the Federal Reserve, there will be um, massive assumptions about your sanity, about your intelligence, about how easily brainwashed you are, forgetting the fact that modern education is brainwashing, modern media is brainwashing, the propaganda that we're being spoon fed daily. Because I think we've talked about this before. It is so embarrassing to be like, oh, I was brainwashed, or I was a victim of propaganda, or I allowed myself to believe something, like there's a humiliation to that. So the oversaturation of conspiracy definitely did delegitimize this kind of like philosophical inquiry, right? That was intentional. The way that, when I think about YouTube as a platform, where YouTube was the Wild West for a while, where you could have all sorts of, if you look at the number 73 that's on the back of this plane ticket, and then you multiply it by what happened in Back to the Future, and like there was this there was this type of media that was happening that was like, it was a little wacky, and then there became all this censorship. But he had great films like Zeitgeist, like I think the guy who did Zeitgeist, he was a real filmmaker, and he did the best he could with a low budget to try to put together, a conversation that was an interesting narrative, looking at the banks, looking at 9/11, looking at religion. I don't know if did you ever watch Zeitgeist, or is that before your time?
I know of Zeitgeist. I haven't watched it, but now I'm on my movie list.
Oh, it's a classic. It's like the Alice in Wonderland of conspiracy. It's like you gotta watch Zeitgeist, and I think there's two. But he basically was looking at the systems of, I think, banking and religion and history. He did a great job with the resources he had as a filmmaker. I don't know what happened to that guy, but I guess my point is that it's interesting, like the part that YouTube played in both being a source of massive disinformation and then also censoring information, and now we live in this post-factual age, and YouTube very much was a part, Facebook in its own way as well, of becoming a post-factual age, which means that we have to rely on intuition, which means that we have to rely on our guts, which means we have to rely on our pineal glands and our pituitary glands, which ironically are constantly under assault with all these endocrine disrupting laundry detergents and cell phone towers. And so we have like the physical disruption of our endocrine system, of our intuition, that is happening with all the environmental pollution, mixed with the need more than ever to be tapped into our intuition to navigate the very choppy waters of misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, false information, and basic brainwashing, and our intuition is under assault when we need it most.
And if you don't think that's intentional, you're a dweeb.
That's part of the New World Order.
Yeah, and you're a pawn. Talk about being a sheepy sheep. Also, stop talking shit about sheep. I'm like, stop using sheep as a negative term. Like, if the sheep, like that, sheep are so amazing. I love the sheep.
And also, groupthink is part of our psychological imprint. And like, We don't need to shame ourselves or each other for being a part of groupthink. We're a part of a collective consciousness. I mean, we can be sheep towards something very cool.
Um, Here's what I'm going to say. If you want to see how brainwashed we truly are, you should come see Grape Culture April 10th, 11th. Oh my God. Wait, no, that's right. April 10th, 11th, and 12th
In
at
New
the
York City.
Soho Playhouse in New York City. We do have a PR marketing call right now, so I'm going to use this as our outro. But you should come to our show April 10th, 11th, and 12th. It's a real good time. I will put the link to tickets in the description on YouTube. You can also find it at grapeculturehealing.com. We have a tour tab, and all of our upcoming shows are on there. And we also have a somatic healing workshop called Claim Yourself happening in Bushwick, Brooklyn on Sunday, April 13th. So come see the show, then come heal with us in real time.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you for taking this marketing call. I appreciate you and I love you dearly.
Bless. We do our best. Love you. Love you guys.